Riley, welcome to Speak for Change.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, it's an honor to have you on, and I'm excited to jump into all the things. And yeah, I mean, you are the new executive director of Carrillo Festival of Contemporary Music.
That's right.
Yeah, how's that transition going for you?
Well, I don't feel like I could have landed in a better place, either both location-wise with Santa Cruz and with the festival.
Oh man. But so something like that stood out to me is that you're actually a composer as well, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so what is your history with music and composition?
Yeah, well, my entire dad's side of the family they're musicians of some stripe. I think my dad is the only one that doesn't have a music degree. He's the only one who's an amateur musician, but he's very talented and very good as well. So it's sort of in our blood. And I grew up playing percussion and band and wind band, and because they didn't really have orchestra, in school districts, especially in the South, orchestra isn't as common.
Yeah.
So it was wind band, and then I also started taking piano lessons around the same time I started. Got a little bit of a late start there. I started on piano when I was 13.
Oh.
And from the get-go, I would come up with little songs and solos for myself.
Yeah.
Even before I probably knew what the word composer was. We had a family piano, so very fortunate to have an acoustic piano in our house. And yeah, I loved playing it. I blame my sister for most things. No, she's wonderful. But she started when she was younger, and it wasn't a good fit for her. So then when I came along, they were like, "Oh, he probably won't like it either." But they're like, "Oh, why couldn't I have piano lessons?"
Oh my goodness!
It's like, "Oh, well, we didn't think of that." So got a little bit of a late start, but I caught up, and and then in college, started composing more and more, and found that I wanted more agency over what I played, and I wanted more voice, and not just do what the conductor told me or do what my teacher told me. I wanted to create my own music, and so started doing that more and more, and then decided when I applied for grad school, I decided I wanted to focus on composition.
Yeah. So for a lot of people, I don't think they know what that kind of schooling looks like. Like, what is a composition focused like school situation look like?
There's a lot of variation out there in terms of how it's structured, especially for composition.
Yeah.
People are familiar with the private lesson and like having a primary teacher for learning an instrument.
Right.
And it's similar to that with you are assigned usually a professor that is your main composition teacher, and you have private lessons with them. You're not playing an instrument unless you're playing your piece on the piano.
Right.
But they are a private instructor, and they're working with you to make your music better, one-on-one. And so that's the real crux of there's obviously lots of other coursework involved, but in terms of your primary teacher, it's similar to how you'd be assigned if you were majoring in trumpet. But the private lesson is a little bit different, but there's still that one-on-one model and that sort of tutor, protege kind of model.
Right. Yeah. I think composition, when you're thinking of like teaching it, even if it seems like a traditional model, I find that thinking about it is hard, right? Like, how do you teach composition? You know what I mean? Like, what did your private teacher, work with you on?
Well, I'll start with saying it is a very difficult thing to do, to teach composition, and the best composition teachers don't have their ego in it.
Yes.
They're able to. David Garner was one of my teachers in grad school at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, and he was incredible because we couldn't be more stylistically different, but he really was able to understand what I was going for in the piece and what my stylistic strengths are, and help me hone that. And that's sort of a level of genius that I don't have, but that great teachers have. So you can, and there's great composers but they could be horrible teachers. Because again, it has to be not about how good they are as a composer.
Yeah.
It helps for them to be a good composer, but they need to be able to have a bigger perspective and have understanding of styles and musical languages outside of their own.
Yeah.
So it is a real talent, and it's unique to find a teacher that can do that.
Man. Well, that's inspiring. So like, what do you think about when you compose? Like, what is your style? If you had to, I know that's I don't know if that's an unfair question or not, but
No.
like, what kind of style do you lean toward? Like, is it more avant-garde, like kind of atonal, that kind of music, or is it more minimalism? Like, what's your vibe?
Yeah. So if I was giving jargon industry speak, I would call it post-classical music. And I use that term directly quoting Kyle Gahn's book, Downtown Music, Writings from the Village Voice, I think is the subtitle. And in that book, he really traces the lineage of downtown music, and of course, New York.
Yeah.
And that's starting with a lot of the minimalist composers, but it's a little bit more expansive than that. So minimalism is a huge influence, but it's also, again, it's a little bit more expansive than that in terms of if I were to try to trace a lineage, and what kind of compositional camp, if you will, I'm inspired by. It's that reaction to what kind of defines post-classical music without having read the book recently. You should read the book. Here's my version of it, sort of succinctly. It's a reaction to the overly scholarly, overly intellectual, overly pretentious uptown new music scene that was happening in the 60s and 70s in downtown New York, which is very different than New York is today. Said let's react from that. Like, we actually care, we actually care like about the audience's emotions.
Yes.
And we care about more than just like the form and structure and the intellectual rigor. Now, that's not to say that that's not important, but like let's not be so tied down to these things that are, that one can write a dissertation on, and it's just, anyway, I don't know if that makes sense, but
that kind of, maybe I'm off, and it's totally okay if I am, but I'm thinking like atonality and 12 tone and serialism kind of lives in that kind of academic camp, right? That kind of intellectual, intervallic composition kind of thing, where you're like constantly, where like when you listen to it, depending on what piece, obviously, but like you can hear the dynamics and like the atonality and all that stuff, but it's more interesting when you like analyze it. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like this kind of depth, I guess, of academia. And it seems like a lot of like, like Philip Glass, for instance, right? He came kind of from atonality in his schooling, but then eventually,
because that's all they were teaching.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And then eventually just went off and, did his own thing, so it's, this sounds like, it sounds perfect. I would love to hear your compositions. Where can people hear your compositions?
All your streaming devices, Apple Music, Spotify. I have a website.
Cool.
And that's not just, anyway, I can sort of see the new complexity composers getting up in arms right now. There are exceptions, but they're like, there's a couple Elliott Carter pieces I love.
Oh, totally.
And there are exceptions, and there can be some really visceral, meaningful, but maybe it's about. So we're speaking in generalizations here, and like the reaction to an overall scene. So.
Yeah, it's all general. It's all generalizations, really. Every composer has different perspectives and different things, even though they're in like a kind of camp. And even if like, and this is something I've learned, even if there's a style like that is not my style, or
or like I wouldn't begin to know how to do that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it isn't valid.
Right.
It's just not what I do.
Yeah.
You
No,
know, or
that
or what.
makes complete sense.
And there's like composers like Thomas Addies,
Mhm.
adore many of his works. I could never do that. It's just not, that's just not how my brain works, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, and I think that's good. Like, we can't be everything. We can't do everything. We have to like find our voice, and
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. So when did this transition come for you from being, an artist and a composer and a pianist into kind of more, is it art administration or executive leadership, like that kind of world?
yeah, I still don't know what to call it.
Yeah, I'm just kind of like that world. Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on the context. Sometimes I'll call it arts admin or
Yeah.
arts leadership.
Right.
But yeah, so it happened in grad school. Part of it is, you know, utilitarian.
Yeah.
I was looking at about to graduate in a very expensive city, and I'm like, I'm happy with what I'm learning. I'm happy with, I had received a couple of small commissions, but it's not enough to sustain a living. It wasn't for me at that time, and still isn't. So there was a practical element to it, but I also knew that I was interested in the arts in general, and I had done some collaborations with ballet and loved contemporary dance, and so I saw there was an internship at Post Ballet through grad school program, and that actually ended up being one of the best decisions of my life, not only because, I gained some really valuable skills, but I also gained an entire community through that. So,
Right.
So I really hit it off with the director, Robin Deckers. We're good friends to this day. And yeah, I learned that I loved being part of something. I loved supporting something that it's not about me,
Yeah.
right? So through arts admin, production, leadership, whatever you want to call it, you're able to be part of productions. You're able to be part of artistic conversations beyond yourself and have a bigger impact than whatever artistic project you're working on. So I love being part of the conversation and feel like I'm giving back and supporting other artists. And then I get so much out of that too, get exposed, make connections. And I also learned that I was good at it. I think I because I am a creative, I understand that world. I understand, how artists speak and I'm able to work with them to bring their visions to life. And so I have that, but I also have a sort of down to earth kind of street smart sense to me that's able to actually then take something that's in the clouds and bring it to fruition and make it happen in the real world. And so I think that's why it's been such a good fit, and why it's so enjoyable. And again, being able to, it's meaningful and fulfilling to be able to feel like you're part of something bigger.
Yeah. What a great answer. I don't think I've ever heard that kind of answer said that way before. This sense of humility and growth beyond yourself, like being able to be part of something that's bigger, being able to be part of something that's just not about your own craft, your own art, and seeing that grow. Like, what a beautiful philosophy almost, it's like, it's almost like a type of philosophy of living by, and I think that's powerful. I think it's really powerful.
I think that's our roles as arts administrators. If we're making it about us, then it's a problem. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Not to say, like, I certainly have a voice in, especially as executive director, but even if you're not the director, you have a voice in shaping something and making it come to life. But, it's not to serve you. It's to serve the mission of whatever organization and the vision of the artist.
Right.
And the more you're able to understand that and have that perspective, the better it's going to be.
Amen. that's a beautiful thing. And I think, I think just been watching you recently. I'm like, wow, what a cool combo, of like an artist in this role. 'Cause I think this is like one of the last executive director at the Carrillo Festival was not a musician, right? And it's kind of cool seeing someone who's like skilled in composition and also skilled in executive leadership, and it's really it's an inspiring combination. So thanks for doing that.
My pleasure. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Ellen, my predecessor at the Cabrillo Festival, no, she was not a musician, but she did deeply understand the creative sector and had been working in that sector for a long time.
Oh, yes.
And been working in contemporary arts for a long time. So I think that's why it also worked for her so well. There is an interesting layer, though, that I am, I can pull up the score.
Yeah.
and
follow
like there is a little bit deeper. So that is interesting and curious to, see how that ends up shaping the role. And, it's great to be able to go deep.
Right.
Lost my train of thought.
Oh, you're good. You're good. I just wanted to quickly ask, like, for one, do you ever get to like see like composers and musicians you're just like totally a fan of in these roles?
Yeah, certainly. Yes.
And like who are some artists that you're like inspired by that maybe living still or composers that you're inspired by? And just the broad general, it could be a rock band. I don't care,
Well, I've only been starstruck once.
You're like, they're all
and
right.
It was because, and I had seen him before.
Yeah.
It was just because he was seated behind me at a concert the whole time, and I didn't even realize it. So it was like sudden, and I wasn't prepared for it. And it was John Adams.
I mean, that's a big deal. Yeah.
Who has a long history with the festival, so I need to get over whatever. And I've met him another time, and it was like, but it just like surprised me because I was at San Francisco Conservatory of Music. I think it was Hot Air Music Festival, and then I was speaking, and then I just turned and I'm like,
oh man, that's amazing. So who are your like inspirations? Like, who do you listen to? Like, what's your playlist like?
Yeah, well,
dun, dun, dun,
dun. The entire lineup on the Cabrillo Festival for 2024.
Oh man, I love this.
Of course, I have favorites. I diplomatically can't choose anyone.
I understand.
This year.
I'm just saying. Like,
I'll tell you after the mic is off.
Yeah.
I am a fan in the non-orchestral world. Somebody who's been a huge influence that I sing their praises is Tim Hecker.
Oh, who's that?
He is an experimental electronic ambient artist. And I love every single one of his albums, which is so rare for like, even with him, my favorite artist, like this album, yes, this album, no, thank you. But every single one of his albums is incredible. He comes from, I think, like the EDM world, but his music is no longer really resembles that at all. Right. He uses a lot of live instruments, and every album it's different. Like one album he recorded a Kyoto, Japanese traditional instruments. Don't quote me on the pronunciation of that. Another album he worked with the chorus, and then he just plays with those sound waves like Play-Doh, and creates these really textural, wild soundscapes that are sometimes very peaceful and sometimes very experimental. And he's been one of my favorites. And then not for the faint of heart, but Arca is sort of similar. Sort of experimental electronic genre bending, very queer artist that I'm a fan of.
Oh man, those are great things. So this other question is more we're going to do a little pivot here. So contemporary music. What is that? You know what I mean? Like what is contemporary music like in like in accordance to like the Carrillo Festival, right? So how would you describe that to somebody who did not know anything about like contemporary music? It's such a vague term, it's
Yeah,
like new
because it just
music.
all it means is contemporary means like of today.
Yeah, exactly.
Which certainly is correct, right? For the Carrillo, it's the short answer is it's living composers. It's of today. It's music of our time for orchestra in our case, right? Because it's the Carrillo Festival and it's a festival orchestra.
Yeah.
And that's what really differentiates us from. There's a ton of new music organizations. There should be more, but but we're really the only ones, certainly the longest standing, that has a sole focus on contemporary music for orchestra.
Yeah.
And so that's the simple answer and sort of what differentiates us. But to your deeper sort of genre kind of question is much harder to answer. I think to me, like, it kind of depends on your audience. You could describe it as contemporary classical because most of the composers have to be trained. I'm going to say most, and for some most, like they're, but the usual path is you're trained classically.
Yeah.
And you might depart completely from that, but a lot of composers are trained classically to understand how to orchestrate, how to create the score, etc. And so some people could consider it contemporary classical. However, you can parse this a lot of different ways, and depending on who you're speaking to, in the field, contemporary classical might mean something very specific. Yeah. Like that's why earlier when we asked, what do you do? I was like, I call it post-classical. I mean, it's a lot of jargon. It's a lot of specifics. And even within the field, I say post-classical. Yeah. Like not everybody agrees with that term or even knows what it means. So we really need better ways to describe our genre. I feel like, and unfortunately I don't have the answers, but I will say that it's a tricky thing to explain. I think music of our time for orchestra is sort of the best way to explain it. And I think that's what the Carrillo Festival, our mission is. It's supposed to be a wide perspective of what the orchestra can do. And I think every year we need to be even better about trying to widen that perspective. And so stylistically, that can mean any number of things. Like, the orchestra is kind of a blank canvas. So it's like, what genre is a blank canvas? Right. Well, it depends on how you paint on it. Yeah. So
I get, it's just really interesting to me because I've been, I've loved this festival ever since I first attended. Well, technically, my first attendance of the festival was Philip Glass kind of got me into it, right? And my buddy was really into Philip Glass. I told him like, oh, he's performing a work at San Juan Bautista Mission, right? And that's something that was the festival did. I don't know if they're still doing it, but they did do it, like things at the Mission. And I was raised in Hollister, so I know the Mission like the back of my hand. It's not that far away from Hollister. And my buddy, turns out like his wife like got him that gift for his birthday, like tickets to the Philip Glass. So I ruined the surprise on accident. I was just like, oh, let's go. And but I totally snuck in to this Philip Glass thing. They got tickets, they went, and I just kind of pretended I was like just like a fancy person walking into the audience room. And when the performance was over, I left through the back and I ran into Philip Glass.
Amazing. I haven't even met him yet.
Yeah, he was just a weird dude, but like, I loved it. He was just like, oh, nice to meet you, And then at the time was Marin Alsop was the conductor, and at the time I didn't know any of these people, but they all just like were just like talking in this little space, and it's just so funny because I totally snuck in. I was trying to be discreet leaving, and I run into like
you did the opposite.
To the two main people. But like ever since I've seen the festival, it's always been inspiring to see all the different diversity of like orchestration, right? Like I've seen people play on styrofoam. I've seen people play like electric guitar in the orchestra. I've seen all these different percussion things, people playing on cars and all this stuff. And I so want to like bring people to experience this, but it's like a hard sell, You know what I mean? For some reason, have you experienced that kind of like obstacle
Certainly.
between bringing the people in, and like what are like some ideas do you think of bringing more folks in who are maybe would love this but just don't
Yeah.
haven't experienced it?
Well, I think lots of factors that build into that. I mean, unfortunately, one of the most damaging things is the culture that's been built up around orchestral music.
Yeah.
And really beyond orchestral music is maybe one of the worst offenders, but it's the classical arts in general. There's an elitism that is real.
Yeah.
And I think it's changing, but it's still real in some, it's still real in a lot of circumstances with a lot of orgs. And what's difficult is even when orgs are desperately trying to change that, it's still so ingrained, like people's perception of it, it's still so ingrained. It's going to take a long time to break down some of those barriers. I mean, I will never forget, I was going to a theater show.
Yeah.
And it was a contemporary play. It wasn't like, an old English play from the 1700s. It was, I think it was designing women.
Yeah.
and a friend bought tickets, and it was a group of us. And then I noticed one of them wasn't there. And I texted them and I said, "Hey, where are you?" Yeah. And they said, "Oh, I left. I walked up to the building. I didn't feel comfortable. Those places aren't for me. And so I left." Yeah. And I was like, it's just a theater show. Because I'm so in this world, I'm so like, it doesn't faze me. But to someone, and this was a person who had disposable income, who was white. Yeah. And so like there could even be more barriers. Yeah. But even like they still felt that the barriers were too high for them to enter, and they felt uncomfortable. They felt like they weren't knowledgeable enough. Yeah. They felt like, as they said, it wasn't for them. Right. Whether true or not, I'm sure the theater would be mortified, because actually I know that theater does a lot to try to be inclusive, and the program was very accessible, but there's still that barrier of perception. And so it's like, how do we break that down when it's like people are so afraid to even come in the venue? So I think that there's so many answers to that question, and there's so many barriers, but I think that's a big one. Yeah. And I think it will take a lot of effort over a lot of years. I think it's how we dress. The Carrillo Festival, it's way more casual, like the rest of Santa Cruz. I think the open rehearsals model is wonderful. And for those who aren't familiar, essentially, it's kind of rare. Not a lot of organizations do this. All of our rehearsals are open, and people can come for free. And it's also like, you're not stuck. You can walk out if you need to go. Midway
people
through.
Do their homework in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's as long as you're quiet and respectful. It's like, it's very casual. And so I think people, and also people getting to see the process and like, oh, these are real humans that are not perfect, that are working it out and collaborating in real time and are having a good time. Like, I think that helps. And so it's not that is the silver bullet that's going to totally make this accessible, but it's things like that we just have to break down these perceptions over time. And
yeah. I definitely feel that. And part of me thinks that, maybe I am totally off, but part of me thinks that there is this sense of like the sense of like the exclusiveness of these spaces. I think the audience like enjoys being exclusive. Like they feel that's part of the draw for a lot of things. I remember going to the orchestra with my grandfather when I was younger, and some people, I remember talking to people, and still this is today, who don't really know anything about the music, right? They kind of go in and they're just like, it's almost just like this activity you do when you're in this certain class bracket or something, you know? And and it's exclusive. Like you're not going to have to run into anybody who you may think is unseemly or like something edgy at all. You know, you're kind of in this safe for that person, for that safe kind of space of exclusivity, you know?
Right.
And so for me, it's like when I think about making those spaces inclusive, I'm always like, do people even really, really want that? You know, like, it feels more of like it's like an identity thing rather than like, well, let's try to do a bunch of things. I think if we turned it into like more of an internal process, like do we know what diversity looks like? Do we know what these things feel like, and are we actually open for that? Because that's a bigger question, you know what I mean? Like
right. I mean, yeah, that you've just touched on something really, really deep. How much time do we have today?
You got all the time in the world, man.
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts there, and that's really profound. I see, not especially here. But I have not seen this especially here. But in general, there is that sense of, even when there's like a effort for diversity and inclusion, sometimes it can be to save our art form.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
right. So there is yes, we want to invite new people, but we don't want to change this thing because it's for us. And so we really have to push against that, I think, because the inherent value is the community we build, the big we, that we build, and the more introspective value, like you said, and I think part of that, I think that probably exists everywhere. Just understanding structures. I think part of that is the American model.
Yeah.
So by that I mean, for better or for worse, orchestras are funded by patrons. Yeah. Everywhere, but especially in the U.S. and in Europe, the state funds. It's different by country, but
kind of like subsidized a little bit. Yeah,
it's way more subsidized in general in Europe, and so the donors don't necessarily have all the power. Yeah. Here, it's a little bit more of a donor-run model, and so I think you have a history of orchestras that really are led by donors. Yeah. And there's amazing donors. We have amazing donors, and like that's the only reason we exist. And they want to see us be as inclusive as possible. But if I'm talking about the model, and maybe why it's a little bit of a different focus, and why maybe it feels a little more like for a certain demographic, I think that's the problem one gets when you have an entire art form that's not supported by the government in really any meaningful way.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And because the patrons are, I think that's the problem with like when you have private money, right, going into these organizations, because there is like this kind of relationship that forms in the sense of like, I think when something's government run, in a pro or a con, whatever your politics are, it's kind of an agreement that this is for like a public good for like the community, and there's more incentives for the community, right? While donors, it feels like it's really about the art form. And I love the Carrillo Festival because I think something that comes out is a diverse composers. I've been seeing like in the past few shows, just a diverse cast of composers, like black composers of coming from different backgrounds, and I think that's really exciting. I think that's like the first step, and I think seeing that, and then also community engagement, which would be like my job, but like like getting people to see what's going on and to see what actually is happening, and then to have the space be welcoming. I'm just challenge adverse, I mean, not challenge adverse. I mean, I enjoy challenges, right? So for me, I'm in a lot of spaces where I initially don't belong my whole life. I've always felt like, I've been in spaces where I don't fit. And so how I responded to that was to be rebellious, right? And when I was younger, I was like, well, I'm going to take off my shoes then. And, just like really kind of leaned into that.
Right.
And then over time, it was less dramatic. And I just like decided just to own it, But not everyone is like that. I've had a lot of friends who I've invited to different things, if it's at the Kumbwa even, or at, Carrillo Festival, or just the symphony, where they just do not feel like they are safe. I mean, so to speak. I mean, they just feel like they don't belong. Like they're being stared at. They're being kind of nitpicked. They're being, like there's this kind of sense of not belonging, and that's an internal thing for sure. But also, it makes me reflect on the spaces that we create, and it's just, I think it's really, really awesome that we're doing, like, definitely this season, that there's just like a lot of cool creative acts happening. I think with Yoon, what's her name? Bora Yoon, and Martin Wynton Marsalis is doing a piece. I mean, he's composed a piece. You know,
he won't be here unfortunately, but
yeah, and I think there's just a lot of cool things happening, and so, but yeah, do you have any last thoughts on that part?
Yeah, I mean, I'll follow up and like say that what I was mentioning really was trying to diagnose the problem and like why the culture exists, but that sword cuts both ways.
Yes.
And I think because of visionary donors and leadership, that like we have done a lot to change the face of orchestral music. Right. And so, so that's thanks to all of our supporters, right? So again, it's not a critique of, in fact, it's the opposite, right? Yeah. Because like, again, the sword cuts both ways, right? Because we have that support that really is behind our ambitious vision to change orchestral music and to make it more inclusive. We can do what we do. Yes. But so again, it's like I'm placing it in the system in which it exists and maybe why we're here. So kind of both of these things can be true. Yeah. I believe in gray areas, right?
that's where the truth always is, right?
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. And I think, like you said, things take time and it takes courage, and there's a lot of elements involved. And I think, personally speaking, I'm looking at the festival and I'm like, man, I'm so inspired. This year I'm like going through the volunteer thing. Like, oh, I'm going to volunteer for that.
Thank you.
But yeah, just so if you're listening, you should check it out either way. All right, we're going to move on to our second part here.
Okay.
All right, first question. Do you have any quotes that you live by or think of often?
Basically everything Ellen Premack has told me.
That's the best answer. What is something you believe that other people think is crazy?
Let's get back to that one.
Okay. Do you have a favorite failure to success story? And like this is broad for a reason, right? Like you could think of it as a failure in the past or not. It's just like what comes up in your mind when you hear that.
So there was a while in college, I was a percussion major. I hadn't focused exclusively on composition yet. And I knew I wanted more creative control, so I was like, okay, I'm going to be a singer-songwriter. And I went through a program at Berkeley, not Berkeley, California, Berkeley, the one in Boston. And a voice teacher told me that I sounded like Woody Allen. And at that moment, I was like, okay, I don't think this is for me. Okay, I appreciated her honesty.
Yeah.
I was like, what is she trying to say? She was like, oh, she's trying to say I have a weird, throaty, kind of nasally voice. Yeah. I'm like, okay, I appreciate this is the feedback, and this is not the path for me.
Yeah.
And so like, I appreciate sometimes when people are honest with you. And so it wasn't a failure. Like I was still going to be an artist and I
Yeah.
still continue to perform, but I was like, okay, I don't think singing is for me. I wanted to focus on more instrumental composition. And so we kind of course corrected, and
Yeah.
it wasn't just that comment, but it was like that comment alongside like, you know, several other things like, okay, maybe the songwrite, like traditional songwriting with lyrics isn't for me.
That's great.
And here we are. So it worked out.
What new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life?
It's a work in progress, but trying to give myself space, you know, then I mean that in a lot of different, that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, like space to be human, space for error, space to not be perfect. Also space, you know, I think I don't believe in the you can have it all.
Yeah.
I think that is capitalist BS because you can't, there's only 24 hours in a day.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to recognize, like, I don't care how brilliant you are, there's only 24 hours in a day, and you have to recognize, okay, right now, I've kind of shut down my social life, and that's okay because it's the festival time. It's their busiest time of year. So I'm giving my space to really focus on work. But then I'll create some balance on the other side of this. And then, you know, same for like, it's about push and pull, and like, and there's not always balance. It's more just creating space for things as you can. And then giving yourself grace. And, that sounds like I'm so wise and, you know, balanced, and, I only half succeed at that. But it's I strive to do that.
Oh man. Love that. When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do you do?
I go to Verve. Sponsored by Verve.
Sponsored by Verve.
Yeah, no, I do. Part of that is like going on a walk. And so I am a caffeine addict. So sometimes that walk is to a coffee shop, but like I movement is key. And so I try to get up and walk and move my body and give myself breaks. 'Cause I can work for a long time if I give myself little breaks, and, you know, like nobody can like completely concentrate for just hours on end.
Yeah. If you had to gift one book to someone, what would it be?
Depends on the person.
Yeah, heard that answer before. Just think of a person in your head that maybe like needs help or something, or needs some kind of support, and you get to recommend a book to them.
The Bible.
I had that book.
No. Yeah. Well, right now I'm reading, my sister recommended to me. It's When Women Were Dragons.
Oh.
Yeah, it's sort of it's new for me. It's a little bit of a stretch for me.
Yeah.
So I'm not through it. I'll let you know if I recommend it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a stretch for me because it's sort of sci-fi.
Yeah.
Which is not normally my genre.
Okay.
I'd say for those wanting to learn more about post-classical music, Downtown Music by Kyle Gahn is a great sort of anthology on the history of post-classical music, as he coins it, which includes like minimalism and a lot of creative work that was happening in like the 60s and 70s, and I think there's even some stuff in the 80s. And then I'd say one of my favorite books would be 1984.
Amen. And appropriate. Who do you think of when you hear the word successful?
I think of Hans Otte. So Hans, like Han Solo, and then Otte, and he was a composer, and he ran a festival.
Oh.
So he kind of a role model because he was able to do both things. I love his piece Book of Sounds. It's a collection of piano solos, and I admire him as a composer, and admire like the work he did and the festival he built as well. And like, okay, you can do both things, and I can really hear in his work the assimilation of all the things that were happening in new music at that time. And I can hear it really distilled very austerely. It's not like it's some wild, myriad of, like, it's very, very much distilled into something that's very austere, but I can hear these different influences all coming together that you wouldn't necessarily expect, that only he does.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a role model.
What advice would you give yourself 10 years ago?
Just breathe.
That's great advice.
Yeah, I think just breathe and take it down a notch.
Yeah.
I think I do have a tendency to be anxious and like worry if it's all going to work out, and worry if I'm enough, and constantly. That's kind of been a blessing and a curse, right? Because it's like positive paranoia. Like I'm worried things aren't going to work out, so I'm going to try really, really hard, and then it works out because I tried really, really hard. But yeah, I would love for that to be motivated a little bit differently and like have a little more faith.
Yeah.
Like still do the work, but have a little less angst about it.
Amen to that. What is something people often get wrong about you?
It really depends. I think it depends on who we're talking about, because I have a lot of different aspects of what I do. I think, as an artist, not everybody understands like what an administrator is. And then it is frustrating sometimes when you're an administrator and people think that that's all you do, and that's like, and I am very grateful for the role and the other roles that I've had in my life. But sometimes that's all people can see.
Totally.
And I'd love to be like, actually, like, I do love what I do, and I do put a lot of myself into my roles, but there's more.
Yeah.
And then similarly with friends or whatever, I think they don't always understand me outside of whatever social context I'm in. And so, I think we all experience this in some way. It's like we all have lots of different roles and identities, and I think I can be surprising that there's more depth, because can be a little bit of a chameleon, and then that's kind of a safe space for me. I will not in a people pleaser way, but I will adapt and kind of not ruffle feathers unless I need to.
Yeah.
But then sometimes people kind of think you're unassuming.
Yeah, right. 'Cause you're adapting to the environment.
Right.
Yeah. What is the worst advice you have received?
Oh boy. Well, it would probably get kind of personal.
Mm-hmm.
But I am a gay man, and I grew up in the South in a very conservative religious setting. Right. So I'm going to let your imagination run wild with that.
Yeah.
About how, queer people die too young, or, or you're not going to be allowed around children, or, some really hurtful things that I think some of those things people have apologized later, but yeah.
Yeah. No, that's horrible. If you could put anything you wanted on a billboard, what would it say?
Give a crap. Sometimes I want people to, like, I don't care what, like, I think, well, I do care, but I just want people to care, right?
Yeah.
I think what the world has too much apathy. Like, maybe don't pretend that everybody's going to be passionate about contemporary music. In fact, I'm counting on the fact that everybody isn't about contemporary music.
Yeah.
Because there's so many other causes that I would love, like environmental justice is important to me, and climate change. And I do little things, but I'm counting that there are other people more passionate than me to do that, because I'm really passionate about contemporary music. I'm going to do everything I can to make the world a better place in this way.
Right. And
I think apathy is, apathy and the lack of empathy is a real blight on our society. And if we all can just lean into our strengths and what we care about and care about each other, then know it's cheesy, but the world would be a better place, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what I look for in friends and colleagues. I want someone who's passionate about something and trying to make a difference, whatever domain is meaningful to them.
All right, so that's kind of related to this next one. What does positive change in yourself and the world look like to you?
Sleeping more.
Yes. That's pretty deep, actually. Think about it.
Deep REM. Yeah, I mean, I kind of throw back to the creating space thing, because sometimes I can take the caring too much to a level that is unhealthy, whether that be with whatever it is I'm working on. So I think that has to be balanced with. So positive change is, playing the long game. Yeah. I
love that. All right, here are the two silly questions to end this off. The first question is, what is your astrology sign, and do you resonate with it? And why?
I'm sorry, y'all. I'm an Aries. And like an Aries, I don't really know anything about any of the other ones. I just know about mine. I don't really believe in it. I'm pretty agnostic, atheist about a lot of things. But at the same time, when I read the description, I'm a little bit like, oh, okay, maybe there's some. I do kind of burn hot and very passionate and and kind of burn hot and burn out a little bit sometimes. So there's some, and like stereotypically they're supposed to be good leaders, and like can rally people around a cause. And I'm like, I'd like to think that that's true.
Yeah.
So
I love that. And, do you hear about, I think I sent you that bar who I thought it was funny. I sent it to you cause you're an Aries, and, there's a bar that like banned Aries.
Oh, right.
Yeah. I don't think the guy even knew anything about astrology at first. He just noticed that all the fights were happening from people whose birthday were like late March to April or something.
I've never, other than I was in Taekwondo.
Yeah.
But other than I've never been in a fight. But
yet. No.
When I'm really mad, I know how to create, I'm also a Southerner, Southerner diplomacy. And sort of, I know how to be effective and make something happen, and they'll never know it was me.
And you're just sitting back there drinking your sweet tea.
Martini in my case, but
that's some villain stuff now. But all right, second question is, if you had a power animal, like an animal that you would get inspiration from, or like that you feel good about or connected with, what animal would that be?
I love foxes. They're beautiful, quick. Stereotypically they're considered cunning.
Yeah.
In reality, I'm probably more like a squirrel, but they're cute too.
Okay, so here's your time to say anything you want to say. Like, if there are any kind of events happening, is there anything happening in your world that you want people to know? Wisdom, whatever you want. So just let me know when you're done.
Well, you give me space, and I'm going to do shameless plugs.
Great.
So one for me is I'm in post-production on a new album with Sarah Cahill and Regina Myers, a piece for two pianos, and working on edits now, and should be released sometime later this year. So just keep tabs on my website or Spotify, Apple Music, and artist name. And then for Carrillo Festival, obviously we're loading in on Monday, and it officially runs July 29th through August 11th. So join us for that. It will be an incredible experience, very packed lineup. There's something for everybody. And then I'd say, looking out even further, of course, we're already planning for Carrillo Festival 2025. And it's also the 50th anniversary of LGBTQ Pride in Santa Cruz. So we're going to be doing some exciting commissions and community partnerships, etc. And so just want to get everybody jazzed for that. And if anybody wants to contribute.
Absolutely. How do people contribute?
So CarrilloMusic.org is our website. And then if you want to be a partner in making our 2025 festival happen, then you can reach out to me directly, and I can share plans with that. And yeah, to be announced. But yeah, my contact is on the website as well.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, Riley, this has been such a fun conversation. Thank you so much for coming in the studio and coming on Speak for Change. It's been like an honor to talk with you.
Well, thanks for putting up with me. It's my honor.
All right, this has been Speak for Change podcast. I'm your host, Thomas H. Pedersen, and thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful day.